Welcome to the Motor Carriers Insurance Education Foundation's in-depth review of coverage addressing the unique operations of a motor carrier. We're going to look at this program for the government requirements, part 1. These webinars are not filed for state C credit and it is a learning opportunity only. If you have any questions during this webinar or for CE, please contact us at the email address trs@mcief.org. Government requirements. This is what makes a motor carrier special, the involvement of the government. One of the cardinal rules I always have when we talk to our insurers, you can always blame the government for things, even from the safety rating or registration or what they tell you. The government requires them to register, and that information for the registration, it was a big part of the application. This is a unique risk motor carriers with interstate commerce have to address to the FMCSA, and what we'll find out is the information they give to the government to allow the government to give them an ID number. Also is information that we can use for our application. So this is what we're going to talk about in this session. Business that provide transportation. First off, where they operate. If you hear the word intra, T-R-A state, they only operate within one state. Do not cross state lines. When this happens, they must register and proof of financial responsibility imposed by the state. Only states they operate in, and not all states have the requirement to and have adopted things, but they deal with the state. You can find out the individual state information can be found out through an ISO product, Motor Carriers Digest. So anyone who are listening that are an ISO subscriber can look at the ISO Digest. I just pulled four states for us to show what we can find by reading the digest on individual states. This is Illinois. Illinois says you have to have a Form E filed, and if you're an interstate trucker, a BMC 91X. But the important part here is also to show that the limit required in Illinois is $750,000. So Illinois requires $750,000. This is for Florida. Florida only requires $300,000 in this limits, except for for-hire truckers registered at the federal level, and they require $750,000 for those. Where if we have for Texas, they have the same requirement, but they require a Form E, and they require $500,000. So we see where Illinois requires $750,000 and a Form E to verify that. Florida requires $300,000 for an 18-wheeler, but does not require Form E. They require certificate insurance. And Texas requires a Form E and $50,000. And then California has their own requirements. They require a endorsement to the policy, a DMV 67, and they require a certificate sent to them, a BMD 75. So before a motor carrier can operate, they must meet the state requirements they're dealing in. And again, we're talking about an intrastate trucker who never crosses state lines, so they just deal with the state they operate in. Most of the states require a Form E. Florida requires an Accord certificate, and California requires a DMV 65. All three of those are sent to the State Department of Transportation to allow them to operate. When you send a Form E, you have to put an endorsement on the policy. This is an endorsement that says basically we'll comply with the requirements of the state law protecting the public. And if we ever have to pay a claim that is not covered under the policy to protect the public, then we give the insurance carrier the rights of subrogation to come back and collect from the insured what had to be paid that there was no coverage. California requires the DMV 67 that conforms those things. We'll talk more about regulations and the proof of financial responsibility later, but this is an overview. And the point here is to show you that every state's different. And so when you deal with a state, you need an intrastate, you need to be familiar as an agent insurance company of those state requirements. Now we're talking about a for-hire carrier who now crosses state lines. This is a federal regulation, interstate motor carriers. Now only deal with the federal government to register as an interstate motor carrier. This step will allow the motor carrier to haul all cargo and to operate in and through all states. So once we cross state lines, now we deal with the federal, and the federal government now oversees those. One of the things, and this is a unique part, because this is one of the biggest changes in the proof of coverage or dealing with the states for financial responsibility that happened since I have been teaching since 1980, when the Motor Carriers Act of 80 came in place. And that is the Safety Lube Act of 2005. This was a combination trying to get rid of the places where you had to register. This was a part of the Termination Act of ICC that happened in 1996, and this was started in 1998. And this is the CRF, Uniform Carrier Registration System. And this is a part of the law, the Safety Lube law, that says intra-state registration for an interstate operation. Now, what we're talking about is they deal with a trucker. A trucker is an intra-state trucker, but they also cross state lines, so they all have to deal with the federal government. So they're interstate operation. So it says once, and this is again the law, and this is the law of the land today, once the registrant has complied with the filing requirements, meaning the 91X filing or MCS 90 endorsement, and pay the fee to the Uniform Carrier Registration fees. Those fees are there to give to the states to enforce the laws. The state may not require any additional payment of motor carrier fees or issue any credential, meaning a separate number operating within or through the state for any annual intrastate renewal. And so this is where the reason this is talking about a renewal is this changed it from where they were required to an renewal. When the law was passed, this is talking about anybody who had to comply before no longer has to comply anymore. Then they also talk about the financial responsibility. This is where we as insurance carrier get involved in it. The filing of evidence of financial responsibility of a motor carrier or motor private carrier operating in interstate commerce shall be established by the Secretary of the DOT. So once you have met that requirement, which is said before, that any state or other political subdivision of a state may not require the filing with a state of information pertaining to financial responsibility of the motor carrier or motor private carrier for transportation of property or persons in interstate commerce. So what that says is now we're dealing again, someone who operates within the state, they're intrastate, they got to deal with the state, but now they have crossed the state lines, and now they're part of the federal. And so what it says in the Safety Lube Act and these requirements are, once you have complied with the federal act, then you don't have to comply with the state acts. This is an important part of it. So once you get the federal DOT number and meet the federal financial responsibility requirements, which we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, the 91X and MCS 90, and those, if you're not familiar with those, that's a filing and endorsement. We'll talk about that in depth here in a few minutes. Then you do not have to deal with the states anymore. However, there is something called state rights, and there's a lot of wars that were filed on that. So the only time now that we talk about is that for-hire carrier who cross state lines might have to still deal with the state. First off, again, if they don't cross state lines, they got to deal with that state, period. That's there. So if you don't cross state lines, you do not have to deal with the states. So once we cross state lines, they might have to meet the financial responsibility in the state they're domiciled in, meaning the state they have registered vehicles in. If the intra-state operation in that state, in addition to interstate, meaning that we pick it up points from El Paso to Marshall, Texas, or we pick up points from Columbus, Ohio to Cleveland, Ohio, and those roads originated in Columbus and the final destination is Cleveland, then you have to deal with the states, because if you go back again and read what we published the previous slides, those are dealing with interstate commerce. This is intrastate commerce. And so then there would be no requirement to meet the registration state they're domiciled in under the Uniform Carrier Registration System. So that's the difference here. You might have to meet them requirements if they don't have for any intrastate operations. So the point here is the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. They're the people who oversee interstate commerce. They require registration, and they're the ones who require meeting financial responsibility. This is for hire and some private. So now we're going to shift to the federal requirements. We did a brief discussion of the states. Now we're mainly going to talk about the federal, and this is where it would be more uniform for us all, particularly members of the Motor Carrier, the Motor Carriers Insurance Education Foundation, which really focuses on the operations and insurance requirements or for hire interstate motor carriers. They must obtain a DOT number. The DOT number, again, as a part of the Safety Lube Act, was also part of the Uniform Registration System, not the carrier registration system. That deals with fees. The registration system deals with registration and financial responsibility. This is an online portable MCA-1 where you go on and there's about 20 different pages you have to ask. It took me about an hour when I went through it and got my authority just to know how to do it. But this is an online. So these are people who need new authority. We'll talk about people updating their authority here in a few minutes. These are people who need new authority. The US ID, the US DOT number, that serves as a unique identifier when collecting and monitoring a motor carrier's safety performance. It will be required during audits, compliance reviews, crash investigations, and inspections that are done on the roadside. So what we do now is the DOT number. That DOT number must be on the side of the motor carrier's vehicle, and when that motor carrier's vehicle gets involved in any actions with the government, or if the government goes and visits your insured at their own location, everything will fall back to and be accountable under that federal DOT number. Now, anyone using a vehicle, private or for hire, for commercial purposes, meaning business purposes, and interstate commerce, meaning crossing state lines, they must have that has a GVW of 10,001 pounds or larger. That's 6 wheels, small wheels, pickup truck wheels. This is a dually or a combination of 4 wheels and a trailer behind it, must meet this requirement and must register. Does this include private as well as for hire? Absolutely. This is what's not understood in a lot of cases. We're not talking about just the 18-wheeler for hire big truck. We're talking about the lawn maintenance company. We're talking about the uniform delivery company. We're talking about the newspaper delivery companies. We're talking about anyone who crosses state lines for business purposes. Now, this will vary, depends on where you're located. If you're in Texas, and in Dallas, Texas, it'd be very rare. But if you're in Rhode Island, most of your business traffic here. If you're in Miami, this probably would not affect the smaller kind of contractor or lawn maintenance company. But if you're in Tallahassee and they cross state lines, it would. So this is the key part here. When we cross state lines for business purposes, then they must register. And this will be included for both for hire and private. And sometimes you might have to meet financial responsibility requirements. If you're for hire, you would have to. If you're private, you might have to if you haul hazmat. And the two requirements here for anyone using a vehicle, 10,001 GVW or larger, that crosses state lines, they must obtain a federal DOT number and pay a fee into the Uniform Carrier Registration System. So public information is required for obtaining a DOT number for interstate. And there are some later we're going to talk about intrastate. So now we're going to talk about what has to be divulged or what the insurer has to tell the government to obtain these DOT numbers. And again, the important part of what we're going through is this is also what must be matched up on the application. And this is what an underwriter, when they get the application, they look at what's at the federal website, and the two things need to match. The information from the retail agent that was given to them by the motor carrier, information the motor carrier gave to the federal government. This is what the information that must be matched up. What the public information shows, who they are, what they are, intrastate, interstate, hazmat or not, what kind of operations they got, if they need financial responsibility, their own road activities. Those are the inspections or out of service, and their inspection results, meaning the on-site are how are they the safety ratings, which would be non-rated, satisfactory, conditional, unsatisfactory. This is what the public information shows. The federal website is fmci.gov. This is a portal of information. When I talk about information and safer, I'm not talking about going to necessarily this website. I'm talking about how you access the information, because a lot of you are using it through a third-party provider. And so you can look at it direct, or you can look at a third-party provider who aggregates the information on the federal website, and this puts a different format, a little easier to read, a little more definitive in what you're looking at. Central Analysis Bureau, CAB. Most of your insurance carriers use them from underwriting purposes. Carrier software has a few insurance carriers who are writing for hire interstate truckers for underwriting purposes, but they have a number of carriers and have a number of retail agents who use it for monitoring the safety ratings of the motor carrier. So however you access that information. What we do, though, sometimes is we look at this aggregation done by Central Analysis Bureau, a carrier software, without really looking at the details, what's in SAFER. So I encourage you to also be familiar when you go direct. And so now what we're going to talk about here is not what the underwriters look at Central Analysis Bureau, not what the underwriters look at carrier software, or what loss prevention people or retail agents look at either one of those, carrier software or CAB. We're looking at exactly what a portal has. This gives us a lot of insight. And so let's look at the raw material where these third-party providers get it and what the aggregation they give you means. So actually, SAFER stands for Safety and Fitness Electronic Record System. This is what it says. It says you also can access this as a motor carrier by a motor carrier having their own PIN number, and that's important here. So if you deal with a motor carrier to start with, smaller ones don't realize that. Ask them if they got a PIN number, because that PIN number is going to give couple things important. It's going to be how they update the information every 2 years, which is a requirement. We'll talk more about that later. It also gives them more detail than we can, mainly the driver information. This is the things that you have here. What most of we look at is in the middle column, the company snapshot that we look at. That's the overview. Analysis information. That's your inspections. Those are the certificate, how many units they have. That's who owns the units. Those are the information that you have in there. Anybody with a DOT number at the federal level or later at the state level will have something in the company snapshot and something analysis and information. If you have an MC number, that means you have authority. That means you're for hire, hauling processed goods in interstate commerce. Then you'll have something in license and insurance that shows the licensing will be the authority you have, what you haul, and shows you the insurance requirements, how and if those were met or not. If you also look at this, there's a couple things on the right-hand side. This is the FMCSA homepage. That's important. That's where you can find the drug testing requirements, the new clearinghouse. This is where you can find anybody on the medical registry for who can do a DOT physical. Also, if you have a dispute concerning an inspection, it wasn't my unit, or the officer cited for something wrong, or now where you can go in and discuss if you're not a preventable accident or not. That's the data queue. The point here is that you can look at these things also that are important to look at, that's not just available in the aggregation. And so this is where you might want to go online and see these other kind of things that might be of interest to you for information. I go on this website to look at what the government is doing to our insured, the proposals, and those kind of things, and the rulemaking that's important to us as these changes are being made. So then we look at the snapshot. So we're not going to focus here. This is where we put our insured's DOT number. You could put their MC number, or you could put their name. Suggestion if you put their name, because this is a search engine, you don't want to be to exact dot, period. You want to be in the first 2 or 3, and then you'll pull up all the numbers, all the names there. Then you can pick the ones that you're particularly looking at, because it also shows you the location you have. So we're going to look at, in this case, we're going to put a DOT number in there. And the DOT number is the identifier here. And the first thing it scuffs up, now we're into the company snapshot for this American Fresh. I've just picked this out at random and we use this as an example. And it shows here, this is information we're going to find in SAFER. It talks about how you update it here. And then you can look at if there's any pending insurance cancellations, the vehicle mile travels update. This is the information you can see that you have here, and also the data queue search. On the right-hand side is 2 links from the snapshot into the SMS results. That's analysis and insurance. Those are the inspection results. Those are the registration results. Also, you have the license and insurance. That tells you if they have an MC number and what kind of insurance requirements they have and who has met those requirements or have not met those requirements as we stand here today. Then we find these things. We find that what kind of carrier they are. They're authorized. If you hear the word authorized for property, you know they have an MC number. This tells you their name. This tells a physical address. This tells you the phone number. This tells you of a mailing address. This also tells you the DOT number that they have, and in this case, the MC number. It tells you the number of power units and number of drivers. And it also tells you when the DOT number was updated. This is an important part here is because that DOT number has to be updated every 2 years. The way you know when it has to be updated is in the last 2 digits of the DOT number. In this case, since the last 2 digits are 98, then the 9 is the second one from the end, and that would be even or odd that you have to update. The last one is the month, so August. So in this case, you have to update every odd August, 1 being January, 0 being October. Because the problem you have here, if they have not updated in the last 24 hours, then they're going to be put inactive, and that's an important part here to make sure they update. You also look at the number of units and number of miles. So when we look at this first information, not only will the application needs to match these things, but the important part here is, and later we'll talk about, and some of you are familiar with as you go through, what's a chameleon carrier? A chameleon carrier would be someone who might not be have an alter ego or have another entity they're involved in, or have a brokerage authority or leasing companies at the same location, same ownership. So what we look through here, everything down to the power units and the miles is what is searched to see if there is another entity that has the same information, same address, the same name, the same contact information, the same phone numbers, anything the same, then that will show up as a chameleon carrier. So one of the things you want to look at for the sake of getting it through the insurance process is to make sure that they do not have another entity, and the only way you can do that is with the carrier software or Central Analysis Bureau who tracks that. What the underwriters look at is the number of power units, number of drivers, and the number of miles. Now, what most underwriters look at for for-hire interstate truckers operating over a 300-mile radius, there is 1 truck, 1 driver, and about 100,000 miles. So just to tell you an anomaly here, when I look at this, I see that you have 9 trucks and you only have 640,000 miles. That's a little low. That's even low because you'd have to get about 80,000 interstate truckers just to generate enough income to keep those up. But so why now? So the first thing the underwriter is going to look at here is the dates that this was updated and how many miles. So we know that something happened between the last time they updated the miles, because that's 2014, and they updated in 2019 here, and so they were using the miles of 2014, and now they're using the unit numbers in 2019. And so they've added a unit or 2. And so the question there is how they did that. You also don't have enough drivers. You have more drivers than units. So that needs to also be explained as a retail agent. How do you explain that? Well, they have a mechanic with a CDL, or they have they have the owner who does not drive except on an emergency basis. So these are things you need to look at to start with. The information application must meet the first items that you have here. The underwriters are going to look at how many power units they have, how many drivers they have, and how many miles they have, and those need to be matched up to be 1 and 1 at about 100 to 105,000. And it's also important to know when they update it. So this is the information you see that affects the underwriting and the acceptance of the risk and the going forward where you're chameleon carrier or not. Then we look at how they operate. Authorized, that means they have an MC number. They're authorized for hire, so they have some authority. If they were not had no MC number and not authorized, meaning not hauling processed goods in interstate commerce, but they're haul exempt, that would be the second category. The difference in those, for you haven't heard my story, is that my father was a trucker. My father's major business was for Vlasic Foods, who hauled their cucumbers from the field to the processing plant. He was a truck broker and had trucks. That was his main occupation. When he was hauling the cucumbers, he was an exempt for hire. And that's how we operated for a long time until Vlasic opened a plant in Millsboro, Delaware. And that cucumber that my father's truck brought into that plant in Millsboro, Delaware, got processed, meaning it got cleaned, put in a jar, put a lid on the jar, put juice into the, put the juice into the jar, put a lid on the jar, put it in the cart, and came out the back door. He could not haul that same cucumber away without having authority now that it had been processed. So if you're insured as a cattle hauler, hauling oranges, hauling tomatoes, hauling logs, hauling anything like that, then they would be an exempt. If they're hauling goods of others that have been processed, then they would be authorized for hire. And so that's the difference there. If they're authorized for hire, you know they also need financial responsibility filings. If they're exempt, they'll need to meet some financial responsibility requirements. That's MCS 90. We'll talk more about that later, so you can find this thing out. Again, we say if you're interstate, or you can have intrastate only. Those are the ones that are haul hazardous or not. We'll talk more about the state requirements of the intrastate. Then you'll have the commodities haul. We all know, if you've done this long enough, this is a joke. Nobody understands what to check here. We want more than general freight, but we don't want too many things. In this case, you have fresh produce, which require a reefer, and you can haul beverages, which might or might not require a reefer. So we want to limit to this. Please tell your insured this is not something they hope to haul. This is not what they hauled in the past. This is what they intend to haul for the next year. And make sure this is accurate, because your underwriters are going to look at this to see how that matches up with the cargo. Also, in some cases, if they're acceptable or not as a risk. Then we look at the inspections. And this is the part here. This is how many units they've had inspected. These are the roadside activities of the insured, where they've had a number of inspections and then out of service. Out of service means they were shut down. When we look at this, we look at how many inspections they had in vehicles 23 and how many was shut down, 8. That means they could not be moved until that vehicle got, whatever shut it down got repaired. New tires, cracked frame, whatever caused it to be repaired there before it was moved. For drivers, typically the reason the drivers would be put out of service is because they do not have enough hours of service left to drive further, and they also do not have enough, or they might not be qualified to drive the unit that they have. And so those are the things. Then you compare it to the national averages. Then we look at the crashes. And from a federal DOT crash, there are 3 types of crashes. If there's a fatality, that means somebody got killed. If they're injured, that means somebody suffered injury and had to be treated away from the crash site, or towed. One or more of the units had to be towed. There are a couple of things you need to be aware of that line. First off, it does not show causation. It just shows that the person's whose DOT number was involved in that crash, period. The insured might not have done anything wrong. Second is that might or might not show up on the loss information, because losses show where we have things that are paid. This might not have anything that was paid because our insured was not at fault. Thirdly, you need to look at this and balance the loss information that we gain when we send to the underwriters the last 3 to 5 years of loss information, and then look at the ones reported these last 2 years of these crashes. Because what's going to happen, and we have some insurance carriers who write fleets with less than, or units, or motor carriers with less than 5 power units who do not require loss runs. But if there is a reportable crash, they will require information concerning those. Second is, if there's a reportable crash and it's not on the loss runs, they want to know what happened, why not. And one of the problems we have here is that's going to be a concern for most motor carriers, even, or most underwriters, even from a fleet standpoint, because that means that they're not reporting all their crashes. So we need to understand these are DOT recordable. There's no at fault involved here. There's no causation involved. However, it is important to match those things up. And when you look at the loss runs that you get from the insurance carriers for particularly auto liability cases, then you look at the information you have here, and if they have crashes that don't show up in here that do show up in lost runs, you know that that would be something that maybe the injury surfaced later, meaning they were able to drive for the emergency medical, or the vehicle could be driven off that would have to be repaired, or if there information that's on here that's not on lost runs, the underwriter are not on lost runs, the underwriter will know why they're not there. Because that's a concern. They're not either reporting all the crashes to us, which is an important factor for underwriting purposes. And if the underwriting loss runs were not required, then they want the details for those. So it's important to track and understand how that works. Then you look at safety rating. There are four types. Unrated, which you'll see a lot. Satisfactory that you see here. Conditional or non-satisfactory. And then what you have here is a compliance review. And let's talk about what's on the website for other risks. This means that they had a visit in April of 2017 that got their safety rating, and what kind of review they had. They had another review in 2020 that were from that. When it talks about a compliance review, that means they went through everything there. What we're seeing a lot of now is unrated reviews. These are the more focused reviews. This is later when we talk about CSA and those kind of things. This is a derivative of the CSA that started in 2010. There are fewer people now getting a full compliance review because that takes all the time. They're getting a lot of non-rated review. And a lot of insurers who have just started their operations have not had a full compliance review because the officer does not want to spend all the time there. They just want to look at focused reviews. So when we look at this, you got to understand how they're rated. First off, they're unrated. That doesn't mean they should not operate. In fact, it means they can operate. You're going to find somewhere, and again, statistics vary, but the last statistics we look at is about 86 to 87% of all motor carriers with MC numbers. Those are for hire, hauling processed goods and interstate commerce. That's the core business of the foundation, are unrated. Only about 11% are rated satisfactory. About 4% are rated conditional, and less than 1%, meaning a fraction, is rated unsatisfactory. Why? Because they're for hire, and the shippers are not going to give them a load if they're unsatisfactory. Now, the numbers I'm quoting are people who are our core business. If you went in and had everybody who had a DOT number, those numbers would be different, because now we got the local contractor, we got a private carrier who you'll find more unsatisfactory because there's nobody policing the part of it here. But you need to understand where this came from and how to look at these things, and look at the time frames that this was done. Now, they were satisfactory in 2017. It was confirmed in 2020, which is more current, but that's good here. But don't run or don't be concerned if they're unrated. Now, the thing that you can find as we go through this, and this is where we have the back to the snapshot here, and this gives you the details, and if you click on each one of these items, it'll tell you how it has to be filled out. And this tells you the street address and what needs to identify where all the principal place of business is. Those are the letters here, and that's the principal place of business, the serial number, the zip code. You also have to look at then the phone numbers that you have of the companies. And you have the mailing address. The reason they want a street number is so the DOT officer can come visit them. Obviously, they need to know where to send the mail if you have a different than a street number. Then you look at, here's a USO DOT number. That's found, then the information about them is assigned by the motor carrier management system, and the DOT number. Then you have, if there's a state ID number, that would be something if they're just intrastate. Then if they have authority, they'll have an MC number. Again, that will require financial responsibility. They will have a Dun & Bradstreet. Not everybody has that. And then you have the insured type here that will talk about if they're what kind of carrier they are, for hire and things. Those are the explanation in those. Then you have the carrier operation, the shipping operation, and those are the information concerning what they're hauling, if it's hazardous or not. And then the operation classification. Authorized for hire, that means they have a federal DOT number. Exempt for hire, that means they're hauling non-processed goods. That's the difference in pickles and cucumbers. Private passenger business, a private passenger non-business, and that would be the private carriers involved in interstate operation of passenger vehicles. You got migrant, U.S. mail, federal government, and those kind of things that could be registered in those areas. We're going to mainly talk about the first two that we deal with, authorized for hire and exempt for hire. Then you look at the number of power units they have, and later you're going to find out these will be from a straight truck to a tractor and trailer, the number of drivers, and then also the number of drivers with CDLs. That could be different here. Then you find out when they updated their 150. They have to update every 2 years, and that update's done by the MCS 150. That's an online, they need a portable 2, that's update, where the MCSA-1 is how they get the original DOT number. Then we look at the miles, and then the cargo carrier. And then we have the carrier rating, and we went through that. A lot of it's unrated. This explains where they get the rating. This is a full compliance review. And then you look at the satisfactory, conditional, unsatisfactory, and then you'll have the effective date of those ratings like we talked about before. Then the last thing I want to talk about, because this is where it's misunderstood a lot, operating status, out of service. Out of service means they're shut down. We cannot write a risk out of service, and it'll have the date they put out of service. Inactive. Inactive means there's two things. They have not updated their 150s, it says here, or they have not paid the fee into the uniform carrier registration. That's what makes them inactive. Uniform carrier registration, the fee basis, or they have not updated information every 2 years. Again, based on the DOT number. Second from the end is the year, even and odd. The last one is the month, with 1 being January, 0 being October. Authorized for hire. That's the people with MC numbers. That means they've had authority and they have had a 91X felony. Not authorized doesn't mean they cannot haul. They can haul exempt. They just can't haul processed goods. And what happens in these cases is that they used to have authority. They have an active MC number, but they cannot use it because there's not a filing in place. That's what the difference between authorized and not authorized. Both of the cases, they have an MC number. If they're authorized, then they would have a filing in place. If they're not authorized, that means the carrier no longer can operate at operation authority and is not authorized to operate. That means haul processed goods. If they're active, that's the carriers with a DOT number, or that's where you'll find the private carriers. So the important part here is not authorized doesn't mean they can't operate. It just means they don't have the current 91X filing in place. So applying for insurance on behalf of a motor carrier, the unique part of it is going through what we had here, the public information. The motor carrier applies for a DOT number. That's done by the MCIEF online. That includes information about their business. Information must be updated when a change in operation and must be updated every 2 years. The updated information is done by the MCA 150. And again, here's the trigger. Every 2 years based on the DOT numbers, last 2 digits. Second one from the end is the year. The last one is the month. And so that will tell you when they should update. The agent obtains information from the insured. So sit down, and before you do that, you need to go with them and look at what is in the public information you have. And so when they tell you how many units they have, how many drivers they have, what they're hauling, you're looking at, as a retail agent, the same information, the information they told the government that's looked in the 150, and see if it matches. If it doesn't match, then we need to change. We need to say, if it doesn't match, then you want to tell them to update it, or you want to explain the application, because you're not going to get any further through the underwriting process unless you explain any anomalies and make that match. Because the first thing the underwriter looks at is the public information through carrier software or Central Analysis Bureau. And even before they look at anything in the application, the first thing they look at is those public, the aggregate that they pay for to aggregate all this public information to determine if they want to go forward or not. And that'll show a chameleon carrier, that'll show some things about their ratings and their scores and that, but it also show the public information. And if there's any anomaly, meaning the application has any difference in what's on public information, process is going to get delayed. So you need to check those things up. And so as a person who deals with this, you need to have one of these two, carrier software or Central Analysis Bureau, to make sure that your information you're getting matches the information underwriters will have. You cannot go forward in this business without having that information. The federal government requirement that a motor carrier then uses a commercial motor vehicle in interstate commerce, they obtain a DOT number. The use of the vehicle, commercial auto in interstate commerce has a GVW 10,000 or larger. It's not an 18-wheeler, but a unit with 6 tires. For hire and private, yes. What's interstate? When the unit's being transported across state lines, either the unit provides transportation or the unit is used to provide local movement of interstate, meaning you're picking it up at the rail side and delivering it from the rail side or from the port. If the definition is met, they must have a DOT number and meet the financial responsibility, meet their responsibilities under the Uniform Carrier Registration System, and that's to pay a fee. There are some states, and this is the states that we have here, that require a federal DOT number for inter-cross-state truckers. These are people who do not cross state lines, who do not haul interstate commerce. The reason this is important here for us is because that information will be in safer. So if you're insured in any one of these states, even a local contractor, they would have to have also this information and updated here. Some states have some variance. Where they mainly vary is that some states have raised it from 10,001 to 26,001. That requires the different registration part of it, those areas. So you need to check that. Most of these states also have adopted the federal operational standards from the hours of service, the vehicle inspections, and those kind of items, even for intrastate trucks, and those things were reported here. So you not only have the 550 federal DOT numbers or the 260,000 MC numbers. Nobody here would have an MC number, but this will tell you the state information. Again, that information will be in safer, and that will be important to match up the application. So the federal requirement, again, obtain a DOT number, who they are and what their operation are. That's the information you find in the federal website. And did they pay a fee to the Uniform Carrier Registration System? They could have to meet the federal requirement responsibility if they're for hire or private. That will require a filing sent to the federal government or an endorsement in MCS 90 on a policy. If you have an MC number, then it's a second application. That would be an OP1, or now that was done in one with the MSA-1. But then they would have to have financial responsibility to protect the public. This is not insurance. Any filing, 91XMC90 does not protect the insured. It only protects the public when there's no coverage. Then you have a BMC3. That's a processing agent. That's someone who can take public processing in case a crash happens in the state the motor carrier is not domiciled in. Every motor carrier with an MC number also has to have a processing agent. That's a one-time fee. There's just a list of people's post office boxes. What happens is then anybody who's injured an injury caused by the motor carrier in the state can go and send the legal papers to that processing agent to then be notification of the court system. These are things you find in license and insurance. A license tells you the authority they have. Insurance calls insurance requirements. And this is where you look at license and insurance. This is a name you must match up here. The legal name needs to match here. Every now and then it can be different than the DOT number. It could be even different than the assets held from the tax ID number here. And then we look at the information you have in MTL thing, and you look at the various information. And this will show you not only the post office box address, but also what kind of authority they have. Common carrier authority, contract authority, or brokerage authority. If they have brokerage authority, that's a no-no, and we'll talk about that later. Then it'll show about the insurance requirement, 750, and then what they have on file. Now, most of your insurers will have $1 million coverage on the policy, but this is just to meet the requirements of a motor carrier to operate with an MC number to operate. This does not mean they do not have $1 million or even more on their policy. And the only reason this is here is so we have to make them legal, and all that's required legal is to give them the $750,000, and so this is what was fired. A lot of your insurers and a lot of your insured brokers don't understand that. This is just to make them legal. It's not what the policy has. The only time this would ever come in play is when there is no coverage. Then you have the BMC3 on the bottom and who they chose to meet that requirement. Then we can find out who their current insurance carrier is, and it says here the effective date. A lot of things that you find when you do the search engines to find out risk who you want to Two, you want to solicit for business. These are the lead services you get from carrier software or CAB or some other source. It'll show the expiration date. Nobody knows what the expiration date is. What those numbers are shown is usually they figure 12 months after the effective date, the insurance filing, that the 12 months after insurance filing was made, the 91X is where the renewal time is. That's not always accurate. That's just an indication here. But this will tell you when it was effective or not. Also, it'll tell you if it's in cancellation or not, and that's something that's important to us. This is the authority history. This is when they had the MC number. When we look at this authority history, what this shows you when it shows it was revoked and shows you it was reinstated. When it shows it revoked, that's when the 91X filing was canceled. And when it was reinstated is when they have a new 91X filing. That's important to hear. Notice in here that most of the time they have the same year, so this is every year. Some carriers cancel the filing every year, some of them don't. This is an important part to alert to the insured. What's your insurance carrier's habit? Do they cancel it every year or not? Because this will show up in their records where it was revoked. And a lot of the third-party providers for shippers or brokers won't give them a load. So it's important to know if they're doing this every year or not. Then this is the insurance filing. This is who they have insurance here. And when we look at here, we can look at if it was canceled or not or replaced. Don't get hung up on here. When it says replaced, that's someone who made a new filing in the same name and address as the old filing. When it's got canceled, that's when the motor carrier actually canceled, the insurance carrier actually, or the insurance company actually canceled the filing itself. That just means it was taken away, because there's two ways to have the filing canceled or not be effective anymore. That's when a new filing is made in the same name and same limits as the other one. That will show replaced. Or the insurance carrier takes an active part and gives the notice, which it has to be 32 days out, that they intend to cancel the filing at a certain date. And that's what's reflected here. So that's going through the process to get them to get active. It's important to understand this no matter how you access this. It's important to understand as a part of the application and to understand this process. We look forward to seeing you going to the motor carriers, the motor carrier and the government part 2 that will deal in with more of the financial responsibility requirements. If you have any questions about this, please again email us at trs@mcief.org and we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.